Hello dear learners, welcome to SWAYAM NPTEL course on methodology of educational research. Today we will talk about the module 17 on non-experimental research, and this is lecture 17, and before going to the lecture we will see the concepts covered till now. In previous lecture we have covered the true experimental research design, where we have seen the types of true experimental research design, its concept, meaning and characteristics, and the second one was quasi-experimental research design, its concept, meaning and characteristics, as well as the type of quasi-experimental research design. We had also tried to understand the true versus quasi-experimental design, its conceptual comparison table was there, and I hope you have learned something from that table. Now, we will talk about the non-experimental research design. So, non-experimental research refers to the studies in which the researcher does not manipulate any independent variable. This is the basic fact about the non-experimental research. Instead of introducing or controlling conditions, the researcher observes and measures variables as they naturally occur either in real life settings or controlled environments such as laboratories. So, if we talk about the psychology or education, here in the distinction between experimental and non-experimental research is considered highly significant. Experimental research can provide strong evidence for cause and effect relationship, whereas non-experimental research generally does not permit such causal conclusions. However, this limitation does not reduce the value of non-experimental research. Rather, it highlights its importance in situations where experimental methods are impractical, infeasible or unethical. So, where there is experimental researches are not feasible, not possible, there we go for the non-experimental research. So, non-experimental research, by their meaning, it refers to studies in which the researcher does not manipulate the independent variable. Instead, variables are observed, measured and described as they are naturally occur in the educational setting. Non-experimental research is a broad category of study where the researcher observes and describes variables as they naturally occur without manipulating them. So, non-manipulative research is this. Unlike experimental research, there is no treatment group or control group created by the researcher. This approach is essential in social sciences and humanities, especially when it is unethical, impractical or impossible to manipulate the subjects. For example, studying the effect of a natural disaster or a person's socio-economic background, there is no possibility of control group or any kind of treatment. So, the primary purpose of non-experimental research are description, prediction and the understanding rather than the causal explanation. So, what are the characteristics of the non-experimental researches? There is no manipulation of variables, no random assignment, focus on naturally occurring educational or any environmental condition, emphasis on relationships, trends and experiences of the individual. Now, the nature of conclusion, what kind of conclusions are coming by the non-experimental researches? Non-experimental researches does not support direct causal claims, but it provides valuable insight into educational realities and conceptual influences. These contextual influences are important for daily life scenario where researches are being conducted in natural environment. When to use non-experimental research? There are some conditions. So, experimental research is most appropriate when the researcher seeks to test a causal hypothesis, and when it is possible, ethical and feasible to manipulate the independent variable, then go for the experimental and randomly assign the participants, you can proceed for the experimental. But Consequently, non-experimental researches become essential when these conditions cannot be met. It means if you are not able to manipulate the independent variable and anything that is not ethically possible, feasible to manipulate the independent variable, then go for the non-experimental researches. So, non-experimental researches are particularly suitable when the researcher focus on a single variable rather than relationship between the variables, like accuracy of first impression. The objective is to examine a non-causal relationship such as correlation, the relationship between the verbal and mathematical intelligence. So, if we are interested for this research, the research question involves causality, but manipulation or random assignment is not possible due to ethical or practical constraints, like studying the effect of brain damage. If you are going to study the brain damage, then there is no condition treatment you cannot give. So, the inquiry is exploratory or experiential, aiming to understand lived experiences. For example, experience of working mothers with depression, the children, the teachers, the teacher educators, any other professionals. This kind of studies can be coming under the non-experimental researches. So, non-experimental research is chosen when the researcher cannot, should not or does not need to manipulate the environment to get the answer. In your field, either it is education or any other field of social science, this is often the most appropriate choice because human behavior is a complex context and cannot always be boxed in a laboratory. So, this kind of human behavior can be studied through non-experimental methods. So, when to use the non-experimental researches, I have tried to give you the visual representation, like if you want to study the past phenomena, any high external validity things are there, description or prediction are intended, inherent variables are there, or any unethical manipulation you cannot go for, then you go for the non-experimental researches. Here an elaboration on the specific scenario when you should opt for a non-experimental design. So, we will go one by one. When manipulation is unethical, if you are getting the permission, people are allowing any laboratory setting is permissible, then go for the experimental. Otherwise, this is the most critical reason that if you are not able to manipulate and it is treating as unethical practice, then you should go for the non-experimental. If an experiment would cause harm or violate the human rights, you must use non-experimental methods. The logic behind this, you cannot assign a group of students to experience a poor teaching environment just to see if they fail or not. For example, studying the impact of domestic violence on a child's school performance, you cannot create violence for a study. You must find existing cases and observe them like in ex post facto. So, you cannot going to create in the family the violence in the family, but you have to pick or choose or find out the families where this kind of environment is there, and you have to go for the study. The second one is when variables are inherent, unchangeable. You cannot change the nature of the variable, like some variables are fixed characteristics of the participant, you cannot manipulate them, you can only select them. So, the logic behind this is you cannot change the person's age, their gender, ethnicity or any past history, either it is good or bad, you cannot change. So, go for this study. For example, comparing the leadership style of a male versus female school principals, since you cannot change their gender, you simply observe the differences as they exist in their working environment. The third one is when the goal is description or prediction, not causation. You are not going behind the cause and effect. So, experimental research is observed with why, cause and effect, and non-experimental research is often better for what and how. They are not searching for why. The logic behind this is that if your goal is to describe a current trend or predict a future outcome based on the current data or the performance, you do not need an experiment. For example, a survey to find out how many teachers in West Bengal are using digital tools in 2024 or maybe 2025, you are describing a status quo, not the testing a new tool. So, because one research is going under me on digital pedagogy, so we are searching, then definitely we are moving ahead with the non-experimental research technique or the method. Then the fourth one is when you need high external validity. Experiments happen in artificial settings like a controlled or lab situation. Non-experimental research happens in the real world, in real situation, making the findings more relatable to everyday life. The logic behind this, that a teacher might behave differently if they know that they are part of a strict experiment. Like you all know that there is the term in the observation that when you know that I am being observed, that is called Hawthorne effect, and there will be some artificial environment being created, that because teacher is knowing that I am being observed. So, observing them in their natural classroom setting provides more authentic data or information related with your research. For example, an ethnographic study where a researcher sits in the back of a rural classroom or the rural community for a month to understand the local culture of learning or the local scenario, then definitely you can go ahead with the non-experimental research. The fifth criteria is when the phenomena has already happened. This is the main condition, that if you are interested in a past event which is already happened, experimentation is impossible because the treatment is over. So, the logic behind is that you are acting as a detective, looking back at clues rather than a chemist mixing a new solution. This is a good example actually. So, if you are taking the example like analyzing the long term impact of NEP 1986 on current literacy rate, or NEP 2020 after 10 years we can study. So, we can go ahead with this non-experimental research. The choices between the experimental and non-experimental method depends on the primarily on the nature and the purpose of the research questions. If the goal is explanation and causal inference, experimental method are preferred. If the goal is description or the prediction, non-experimental methods are more appropriate. So, importantly, both approaches can complement each other, but it is upon us as a researcher that what kind of research method we can use for our study. So, for example, Milgram's original obedience study was observational and non-experimental, but it later inspired a series of controlled experiments that examined factors influencing obedience. So, this is very famous research on the mixing of earlier non-experimental, then following by the experimental research. So, it depends on our researches, that what kind of researches we are conducting, and many times the non-experimental researches are giving a light, a direction for the experimental researches further. Now, the types of non-experimental research. Non-experimental research broadly falls into correlational and observational categories. Correlational research examines the statistical relationship between the two or more variables without manipulating any of them. Researchers measure variables as they occur and assess the degree to which they are related with each other. For example, a study exploring the relationship between self-esteem and academic achievement may analyze students' self-esteem scores alongside their grade pay their grade marks, and the observational research involves systematically observing behavior in natural or laboratory settings without intervention. Milgram's, which I have already mentioned, that Milgram's initial obedience study exemplified this approach, as the participants were observed and under uniform conditions without experimental manipulation. Similarly, research on false childhood memories rely on observing participants' responses to repeated questions, revealing that significant proportion reported before of events that never occurred. They have their memory, but that is false memory. So, now the types of non-experimental research, I have tried to create the visuals for your better understanding. The type of non-experimental research, the first one is descriptive research. In descriptive research, you can find that survey research, case studies, then correlational research where positive correlation, negative correlation. The third one is causal comparative research, then historical research, and the lastly the ethnographic research. So, we will go one by one. The descriptive research. The descriptive research's primary goal is to provide snapshot of a situation where group or phenomena is existing. It answers the questions of what, where and when, but not why. It is not focusing on why. Like survey, collecting data from a large group to identify trends. For example, a study determined to the average screen time of PG student at Viswabharati. Case studies, an in-depth longitudinal examination of a single instance. That instance may be a person, a classroom or organization, any incident, accident, anything can be a case. For example, an analysis of how a specific school successfully implemented a gender neutral curriculum, or how they are following the NEP 2020, how they are following the IKS in Indian scenario. So, this kind of case studies can be conducted. The second one is correlational research. Correlational researches are the designed to explore the statistical relationship between the two variables. The researcher measures the variables to see if a chance in one is associated with a chance in other one. So, important is that the correlation does not equal causation. They are not seeking for the cause and effect. It has two types, that is positive correlation. Both variables move in the same direction. One is increasing, then another is also increasing, like if you are increasing the study habit or study hours, then your grades will also increase. The negative variables, the negative correlation, where variables move in opposite direction, student absence and exam scores. So, if students are not attending the classes, that will affect their results or the marks. So, this is having negative correlation. For example, investigating whether there is a relationship between teachers' year of experience and the level of student engagement in the classroom. So, definitely this kind of a study will be having positive correlation. The experience matters in the teaching. The third one is causal comparative or ex post facto research. Here ex post facto means the after the fact. In this design, the researcher looks at a pre-existing condition like gender or being a smoker or drinking or any kind of habit, and compares groups to see how that condition affects a dependent variable. Main difference from experimental research is that the researcher did not make the participant smokers. That is not the condition. They are already smokers and researcher is going to study on them. They were already smokers before study started. For example, comparing the academic performance of the students from rural versus urban backgrounds, the researcher cannot assign students to a background. So, they compare existing groups. I cannot assign you, you have to play the role of rural student and someone has to play the role of urban student, not like that. They are belonging from their rural or urban background, and researcher has to study as per their belongingness. The next one is historical research. This involves studying a past events to understand the present patterns or predict future trends. It relies heavily on primary sources like diaries, official documents and artifacts. For example, a study on the evolution of Rabindranath Tagore's educational philosophy and its impact on modern pedagogy in West Bengal. The fifth one is ethnographic research. Ethnographic researches are rooted in anthropology. This involves the researcher immersing themselves in a particular community or culture to observe behavior and social interactions in their natural environment. For example, a researcher living in a tribal village for 6 months to understand their indigenous methods of knowledge transmission. Now, there are few other research types which can come under the non-experimental, that is cross sectional, longitudinal and cross sequential studies. When researchers aim to study change over time, particularly in developmental, psychological, they typically employ one of 3 non-experimental designs. Because these designs are not in your curriculum, that is why I want you to know about these concepts, because this is useful for your upcoming NET examinations also. That is why I have kept here in this lecture. So, cross sectional studies, it compares different pre-existing groups at a single point in time, such as individuals from different age ranges. These designs do not involve manipulation or random assignment, which makes them non-experimental. A major limitation is to the possibility of cohort effects, where the observed differences may reflect generational influences rather than true developmental changes. The second one is longitudinal studies. It addresses the limitation by following the same group of participants over an extended period. Although they provide stronger evidence of developmental changes, they are time consuming and resource intensive. In longitudinal researches, at least you need 3-4 years, 5 years, 10 years to conduct this kind of researches. So, this is time consuming and resource intensive also. The third one is cross sequential studies. It combines the elements of both approaches, cross sectional and longitudinal. Researchers study multiple age groups over a shorter time span, allowing for immediate age comparison while also tracking changes over time. This design helps distinguish between the age related effects and cohort effects, offering a more balanced approach. So, in the present time you will see many studies are being conducted in non-experimental researches, that is cross sequential studies. Now, the qualitative observational research, many times the observational studies are qualitative in nature. We know it involves the non-numerical data that cannot be analyzed statistically. For example, Rohanson's study of psychiatric hospitals lie on descriptive field noted and hospital records. The analysis focus on detailed narrative accounts supported by illustrative examples such as description of the patient, depersonalization. Qualitative analysis method vary depending on the research question and may include thematic analysis and conversational analysis. So, this qualitative observational research concept I had taken from the John W. Best, and now let us compare to the experimental and non-experimental research on the next sheet. And here I have prepared one table for your better understanding, that if your concept is clear regarding the experimental research and non-experimental research on the basis of manipulation. In experimental research, high manipulation, but in non-experimental no manipulation of the variables. Controlled situation, strict control over the extraneous variable, and little to or no control over the environment. Then randomization, it is essential for the validity in the experimental research, whereas there is no requirement here in the non-experimental research. Then goal here in experimental research to determine the cause and effect, and here in non-experimental research to relate to describe the concept. Now, the common fields are there. In medicine, psychology and hard sciences we use the experimental researches most oftenly, and in education, sociology, history, humanities we use the non-experimental researches, and experimental researches in some restricted situation like in classroom situation and all in our education field. Then manipulation, high manipulation, I think this is pasted again, no problem. Then the internal validity of non-experimental research. Internal validity refers to the degree to which a study supports the conclusion and the changes in the independent variable caused changes in the dependent variable. So, experimental research typically has the highest internal validity because it involves the manipulation and happened in the controlled extraneous variable situation, whereas in non-experimental or correlational researches has the lowest internal validity as it lacks both the manipulation and the control situation. So, quasi-experimental research lies between the two, incorporating some but not all features of the true experiments. For instance, a study comparing the bullying rates between the two schools, one with an anti-bullying program and one without any suggest or any intervention effect. So, however, without random assignment, differences between schools could be due to the selection effect rather than the program itself. So, if you have selected the two different type of school, then difference will come. Internal validity should be viewed along a continuum rather than to a fixed category. A well designed quasi-experimental research may have higher internal validity than a poorly controlled experiment. Moreover, internal validity is only one aspect of overall research quality and must be balanced with the other forms of validity. Now, if we want to check the summary, if you want to conduct the non-experimental researches, then ask yourself that is it wrong to manipulate the variable? If yes, then go for ethical issues, ex post facto design you can use. Is it the variable to fixed trait like age? If yes, then go for the correlation study. Am I just exploring a new topic? If yes, exploratory, go for the qualitative case study. If the question is, do I want to see real life as it is? Yes, then go for naturalism, and observational or ethnographic studies will be helping you. And if the question is, did the event happen in the past? It is, if yes, this is historical, and go for the historical research. So, I tried to make it simple. So, now we will go for the general research process in non-experimental research. This is as simple as the previous researches also. Identify the research question, focus on what, how, whether and variables related, not why causation. Choose a design, either it is descriptive, correlational, observational or cross sectional and longitudinal. Whatever is that, you decide the method, then data collection, go for the survey or systematic observation, whatever existing records are there you can use it. Then data analysis, look for the patterns, correlations, description, statistical test, identify the strength, direction, relationship, either Pearson R or a product moment, whatever is applicable you can use it. Then go for the interpretation. Descriptive findings are there, you go for the interpretation of your finding, and lastly we can go for the conclusion here in this lecture that non-experimental research plays a dynamic role in educational researches by enabling researchers to study educational phenomena as they naturally occur, without manipulating variables or imposing artificial controls. Although it does not allow strong causal conclusions, non-experimental research is indispensable for description, exploration and prediction in real educational setting. It is particularly valuable when experimental approaches are ethically, practically and administratively infeasible, such as in studies involving learners' characteristics, institutional practices or policy context. There you will face the difficulty. So, by providing rich contextual insight and identifying meaningful relationship among the variables, non-experimental research often lays the conceptual and empirical foundation of subsequent experimental and quasi-experimental studies. Thus, non-experimental research contributes significantly to building a comprehensive and realistic understanding of education. Now, I have given some references for your further reading. Here I have mentioned categorically the Creswell, that this book is very beneficial for you. I hope you will go through the references and keep learning. Thank you.